And we're continuing with the 25th chapter of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, which is called Good Angels and Bad Angels. We are at a party at the Waterbrook home where Tommy Traddles from David's school days has shown up again. Uriah Heep, who we now pretty much have confirmed is the villain of this piece, is also at this party. "I confess, I am of Mrs. Waterbrook's opinion," said Mr. Waterbrook, with his wine-glass at his eye. "Other things are all very well in their way, but give me blood." "Oh, there is nothing," observed Hamlet's aunt, "so satisfactory to one. There is nothing that is so much one's beau ideal of all that sort of thing, speaking generally. There are some low minds, not many, I am happy to believe, but there are some that would prefer to do what I should call bow down before idols, positively idols before services, intellect, and so on. But these are intangible points. Blood is not so. We see blood in a nose and we know it. We meet with it in a chin and we say, there it is, that's blood. It is an actual matter of fact. We point it out. It admits of no doubt. The simpering fellow with the weak legs, who had taken Agnes down, started to question more decisively yet. I thought, "You know the deuce of it," said this gentleman, looking round the board with an imbecile smile. "We can't forgo blood, you know. We have blood. We must have blood, you know. Some young fellows, you know, may be a little behind their station, perhaps in point of education and behaviour, and may go a little wrong, you know, and let themselves and other peoples into a variety of fixes and all that. But deuce take it, it's delightful to reflect that they've got blood in 'em. Myself, I'd rather at any time be knocked down by a man who had got blood in him than I'd be picked up by a man who hadn't." This sentiment, on compressing the general question in a nutshell, gave the utmost satisfaction and brought the gentleman into great notice until the ladies retired. I was very glad indeed to get upstairs to Agnes and to talk with her in a corner, and to introduce Traddles to her, who was shy but agreeable, and the same good-natured creature still, as he was obliged to leave early on account of going away next morning for a month. I had not nearly so much conversation with him as I could have wished, but we exchanged addresses and promised ourselves the pleasure of another meeting when he should come back to town. Uriah, who had never ceased to hover near us, was close behind me when I went downstairs. He was close beside me when I walked away from the house, slowly fitting his long skeleton fingers into the still longer fingers of a great Guy Fawkes pair of gloves. It was no disposition for Uriah's company, but in remembrance of the entreaty Agnes had made to me, I asked him if he would come to my home and if he would come home to my rooms and have some coffee. "Oh, really, Master Copperfield," he rejoined. "I beg your pardon, Master Copperfield, but the other comes so natural. I don't like that you should put a constraint upon yourself to ask an humble person like me to your house." "There is no constraint in the case," said I. "Will you come?" "I should like to very much," replied Uriah with a writhe. "Well, then come along," said I. I could not help being rather short with him, but he appeared not to mind it. We went the nearest way without conversing much upon the road, and he was so humble in respect to those scarecrow gloves that he was still putting them on, and seemed to have made no advance in that labor when we got to my place. I led him up the dark stairs to prevent his knocking his head against anything, and really his damp cold hand felt so like a frog in mine that I was tempted to drop it and run away. Agnes and hospitality prevailed, however, and I conducted him to my fireside. When I lighted my candles, he fell into meek transports with the room that was revealed to him, and when I heated the coffee, he professed so much emotion that I could joyfully have scalded him. "Oh, really, Master Copperfield? I mean, Mr. Copperfield," said Uriah. "You see, you waiting upon me is what I never could have expected, but one way and another, so many things happened to me, which I never could have expected, I am sure, in my humble station, that it seems to rain blessings on my head. You have heard something, I say, of a change in my expectations, Master Copperfield. I should say, Mr. Copperfield." As he sat on my sofa, with his long knees drawn up, under his coffee cup, his hat and gloves upon the ground close to him, his spoon going softly round and round, his shadowless red eyes, which looked as if they had scorched their lashes off, turned toward me without looking at me, the disagreeable dints in his nostrils coming and going with his breath, and a snaky undulation pervading his frame from his chin to his boots, I decided in my own mind that I disliked him intensely. It made me very uncomfortable to have him for my guest, for I was young then and unused to disguise what I so strongly felt. "I have heard something, I say, of a change in my expectations, Master Copperfield. I should say Mr. Copperfield," observed Uriah. "Yes," said I, "something." "Ah, I thought Miss Agnes would know of it," he quietly returned. "I am glad to find Miss Agnes knows of it. Oh, thank you, Mr. Copperfield." I could have thrown my boot jack at him. It lay readily on the rug, for having entrapped me into this disclosure of anything concerning Agnes, however immaterial, but I only drank my coffee. "What a prophet you have shown yourself, Mr. Copperfield," pursued Uriah. "Dear me, what a prophet you have proved yourself to be. Don't you remember saying to me once that perhaps I should be a partner in Mr. Wickfield's business, and perhaps it might be Wickfield and Heep? You may not recollect it, but when a person is humble, Master Copperfield, a person treasures such things up." "I recollect talking about it," said I, "though I certainly did not think it very likely then." "Oh, who would have thought it likely, Mr. Copperfield?" returned Uriah enthusiastically. "I am sure I didn't myself recollect saying with my own lips that I was much too humble, so I considered myself really and truly." He sat with that carved grin on his face, looking at the fire as I looked at him. "But the humblest persons, Master Copperfield," he presently resumed, "may have the instruments of good. I am glad to think I have been the instrument of good to Mr. Wickfield, and that I may be more so. Oh, what a worthy man he is, Mr. Copperfield, but how imprudent he has been." "I'm sorry to hear it," said I. I could not help adding rather pointedly, "on all accounts." "Decidedly so, Mr. Copperfield," replied Uriah. "On all accounts, Miss Agnes above all. You don't remember your own eloquent expressions, Master Copperfield, but I remember how you said one day that everybody must admire her, and how I thanked you for it. You have forgot that, I have no doubt, Master Copperfield." "No," I said dryly. "Oh, how glad I am you have not," exclaimed Uriah. "To think that you should be the first to kindle the sparks of ambition in my humble breast, that you've not forgot it. Oh, would you excuse me having a cup more coffee?" Something in his emphasis he laid upon the kindling of those sparks, and something in the glance he directed at me as he said it, made me start as if I had seen him illuminated in a blaze of light, recalled by his request, preferred in quite another tone of voice. I did the honors, but I did them with an unsteadiness of hand, a sudden sense of being no match for him, and a perplexed, suspicious anxiety as to what he might be going to say next. He said nothing at all. He stirred his coffee round and round. He sipped it. He felt his chin softly with his grisly hand, and he looked at the fire. He looked about the room. He gasped rather than smiled at me. He writhed and undulated about in his deferential servility. He stirred and sipped again, but he left the renewal of the conversation to me. So, Mr. Wickfield, said I at last, who is worth 500 of you or me. For my life, I think I could not have helped dividing that part of the sentence with an awkward jerk. Has been imprudent, has he, Mr. Heap? Oh, very imprudent indeed, Master Copperfield, returned Uriah, sighing modestly. Oh, very much so, but I wish you'd call me Uriah, if you please. It's like old times. Well, Uriah, said I, bolting it out with some difficulty. Thank you, he returned with fervor. Thank you, Master Copperfield. It's like the blowing of old breezes or the ringing of old bells. Of the ringing of old bells is to hear you say Uriah. I beg your pardon, was I making any observation? About Mr. Wickfield, I suggested. Oh, yes. Master Copperfield, he proceeded in a soft voice, there is no doubt about it. There would have been loss, disgrace. I don't know what all. Mr. Wickfield knows it. I am the humble instrument of humbly serving him, and he puts me on an eminence I hardly could have hoped to reach. How thankful I should be. I recollected well how indignantly my heart beat as I saw his crafty face, with the appropriately red light of the fire upon it, preparing for something else. Master Copperfield, he began, but am I keeping you up? You are not keeping me up. I generally go to bed late. Thank you, Master Copperfield. I have risen from my humble station since you used to address me, it is true, but I am humble still. I hope I never shall be otherwise than humble. You would not think the worse of my humbleness if I make a little confidence to you, Master Copperfield, will you? Oh, no, said I with an effort. Thank you. He took out his pocket handkerchief and began wiping the palms of his hands. Miss Agnes, Master Copperfield. Well, Uriah? Oh, how pleasant to be called Uriah spontaneously, he cried, and gave himself a jerk like a convulsive fish. You thought her looking very beautiful tonight, Master Copperfield? I thought her looking as she always does, superior in all respects to everyone around her, I returned. Oh, thank you. It's so true, he cried. Thank you very much for that. Not at all, I said loftily. There is no reason why you should thank me. Why, that, Master Copperfield, said Uriah, is in fact the confidence that I am going to take the liberty of reposting. Humble as I am, he wiped his hands harder and looked at them in the fire by turns, humble as my mother is, and lowly as our poor but honest roof has ever been, the image of Miss Agnes. I don't mind trusting you with my secret, Master Copperfield, for I have always overflowed toward you since the first moment I had the pleasure of beholding you in a pony-shay. Has been in my breast for years. Oh, Master Copperfield, what a pure affection! With what pure affection do I love the ground my Agnes walks on. I believe I had a delirious idea of seizing the red-hot poker out of the fire and running him through with it. It went from me with a shock, like a ball fired from a rifle, but the image of Agnes, outraged by so much as the thought of this red-headed animal, remained in my mind. When I looked at him, sitting all awry, as if his mean soul gripped his body and made me giddy. And I will pause there.